"Ma'am, step away from the window and keep your hands where we can see them." The command blasted through a loudspeaker before the sun had fully cleared the rooftops, shattering the quiet of a sleepy Virginia neighborhood. Red and blue lights washed across trimmed lawns, parked pickup trucks, and white picket fences as nearly 30 police vehicles lined both sides of Maple Ridge Drive. Curtains twitched. Front doors cracked open. Neighbors stepped onto porches in robes and slippers, staring toward the modest brick house at the end of the street. It looked no different from the others. A small front yard, a weathered mailbox, a porch swing that moved gently in the cool morning breeze. Yet somehow, it had become the center of a massive operation. Inside the house, Naomi Carter stood by her kitchen sink, holding a watering can. The radio on the counter played a soft country song beneath the distant hum of engines. For a moment, she simply listened. Not to the officers outside, not to the radios crackling through the neighborhood. She listened to the water dripping from the spout of the can into a small ceramic planter holding yellow daisies. Then she set the can down carefully and looked through the window. Police cruisers stretched farther than she could count. Uniformed officers stood behind vehicle doors. Several spoke into microphones. Others watched the house with expressions that suggested they expected something dramatic to happen. Naomi blinked once. Then she reached for her coffee mug. The ceramic was still warm. Across the street, Mrs. Patterson pressed a hand against her chest. "Oh my Lord," she whispered to her husband. What did Naomi do? Nobody had an answer. As far as anyone knew, Naomi Carter was the quiet black woman who waved politely, kept her lawn trimmed, and spent weekends planting flowers. She never hosted parties, never raised her voice, never gave anyone a reason to talk. Yet now, nearly every resident on the block stood watching her home, surrounded by law enforcement. The loudspeaker crackled again. "Naomi Carter, exit the residence immediately." A younger officer adjusted his tactical vest and glanced toward Sheriff Daniel Mercer. "You really think she's dangerous?" he asked quietly. Mercer never took his eyes off the house. "I think we follow orders." The younger officer nodded, though uncertainty lingered in his expression. Something about the scene felt wrong. The house didn't look threatening. The woman inside certainly didn't fit the image described in the briefing they had received before dawn. Back inside, Naomi walked calmly through the living room. Family photographs lined a bookshelf. Most showed no faces, only landscapes, mountains, deserts, and sunsets from places few people would recognize. Above the fireplace hung a faded American flag folded neatly inside a display case. Naomi paused in front of it. The morning light touched the glass, reflecting across her face. Outside, another wave of whispers spread through the crowd of neighbors. Some pulled out phones. Others exchanged theories. The story was already growing larger than the truth. Naomi could feel it happening. She had seen it happen before. She knew how quickly assumptions became facts in the minds of strangers. A sharp knock echoed through the front door. Then another. Firm. Official. Impatient. Naomi drew a slow breath. Her shoulders remained relaxed. Her heartbeat never changed. Through the window, she noticed a rose bush near the porch. Several blooms had opened overnight, bright red against the pale morning sky. For the briefest moment, she smiled. Then she turned toward the door as the neighborhood held its breath, waiting for the woman in the small brick house to reveal why 30 police officers had come looking for her before sunrise. The front door opened slowly, and every conversation on Maple Ridge Drive died at once. Naomi Carter stepped onto the porch, carrying nothing except the coffee mug she had been holding moments earlier. The morning air was cool against her face. Dew still clung to the grass. Somewhere in the distance, a lawn sprinkler clicked rhythmically, strangely ordinary compared to the spectacle unfolding around her. Sheriff Daniel Mercer straightened immediately. Several officers shifted their footing. Others raised notepads, waiting. Naomi looked from one police vehicle to the next, her calm gaze moving across the flashing lights without a trace of panic. It was as if she had stepped outside to greet neighbors rather than an entire law enforcement operation. "Good morning," she said. Her voice was steady and polite. The words caught a few officers off guard. Mercer stepped forward. "Naomi Carter? That is correct. We need you to cooperate with an active investigation." Naomi nodded once. "Then I assume you have documentation." The sheriff hesitated for half a second before motioning toward a deputy holding a folder. The deputy approached and handed over several pages. Naomi accepted them carefully. The neighborhood watched in silence. Mrs. Patterson leaned farther over her porch railing. Across the street, two teenagers who should have been getting ready for school stood frozen beside their bicycles. Naomi read every page. She did not skim. She did not rush. The only sounds were distant engines and the occasional chirp of a bird. After nearly a full minute, she lowered the documents and looked directly at Mercer. There are several errors here. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Mercer crossed his arms. The warrant was approved. That does not change the errors. Naomi handed the papers back. The address reference on page 3 does not match the parcel identification number. The timeline listed in the affidavit conflicts with the attached report, and the property description includes a detached structure that does not exist. The deputy blinked. Mercer frowned. Several officers exchanged glances. Naomi had noticed details most people would never have seen. You reviewed that rather quickly, Mercer said. I read quickly. Her answer was simple. Nothing more. The sheriff studied her face, searching for nervousness. He found none. You are still required to cooperate. I have not refused. Naomi took a sip of coffee. The gesture seemed to frustrate Mercer more than any argument could have. Across the street, whispers grew louder. People were beginning to realize something felt unusual. The woman everyone assumed was an ordinary retiree spoke with a level of precision that did not fit their expectations. A younger officer glanced toward the house. Through an open window, he could see bookshelves lining an interior wall. Hundreds of books. Many looked technical, historical, government-related. The officer frowned. That detail had not appeared anywhere in the briefing. Meanwhile, Naomi remained perfectly composed. The sunlight had risen higher now, casting golden light across the porch steps and illuminating the silver strands beginning to appear in her dark hair. She looked less like someone under investigation and more like a professor interrupted during a quiet morning. Mercer took another step forward. Miss Carter, where were you 3 nights ago between 8 and 10 in the evening? Naomi answered immediately. In my garden until 8:22. Inside my house afterward. The security cameras can confirm both. Another glance passed between officers. You have security cameras? One deputy asked. 14. The deputy's eyebrows lifted. Naomi took another calm sip from her mug. Then she looked beyond the officers toward the growing crowd of neighbors. Their expressions had changed. Curiosity was replacing suspicion. Questions were replacing assumptions. And for the first time that morning, Sheriff Mercer began to feel a faint and uncomfortable sensation that the operation he had confidently led before sunrise might not be unfolding the way he expected. The tension in the street deepened with every passing minute. Sheriff Mercer had arrived expecting a straightforward operation, but the confidence he carried before dawn was beginning to erode. He turned slightly toward Lieutenant Richard Hale, the man standing beside an unmarked county vehicle near the edge of the scene. Hale had been unusually involved from the beginning, insisting that the operation move quickly and that Naomi Carter be treated as a priority target. Even now, he remained focused on the house rather than the growing unease among the officers. Mercer walked over to him while deputies maintained their positions. You told me this case was airtight, Mercer said quietly. Hale adjusted his tie and glanced toward Naomi. It is. We received credible intelligence. From whom? Mercer asked. Hale hesitated. A confidential source. The answer was technically acceptable, but it did not satisfy Mercer. Something about the entire situation felt increasingly strange. Across the street, Naomi stood calmly on her porch as if she had all the time in the world. The morning sun illuminated the front of her house, revealing details most people had never noticed before. A bronze plaque mounted near the entrance. A flag display inside the living room. Several framed certificates partially visible through the window. One deputy squinted toward the glass. Has anyone actually looked into her background? He asked another officer. Just the summary report. Maybe we should have looked deeper. Meanwhile, neighbors continued gathering. The crowd had nearly doubled. Some residents arrived carrying coffee cups. Others stood at the edge of their lawns, exchanging theories. Yet the more they watched Naomi, the less she resembled the image described by rumor. She did not look frightened. She did not look cornered. If anything, she seemed disappointed. Sheriff Mercer noticed it too. Returning toward the porch, he stopped several feet away. Miss Carter, there is something I would like clarified. Naomi nodded. Go ahead. How did you identify those warrant errors so quickly? A faint smile appeared on her face. Because accuracy mattered for most of my career. Mercer waited. Naomi offered nothing further. The answer only deepened the mystery. A light breeze moved through the neighborhood, rustling leaves and gently shifting the American flag visible through her front window. Several officers followed Mercer's gaze. The folded flag sat inside a polished wooden display case unlike anything normally found in an ordinary residence. Nearby rested a shadow box containing medals. From where they stood, the details were impossible to read. Yet their presence raised questions. Questions nobody had asked before that morning. At the same time, Lieutenant Hale appeared increasingly uncomfortable. He checked his phone repeatedly. He stepped away to make brief calls. Each time he returned, his expression grew tighter. Naomi noticed. She noticed everything. Her eyes followed him for only a moment before returning to the sheriff. You should verify your information independently, she said calmly. Mercer frowned. What does that mean? It means someone wanted you here. The statement landed heavily. Several nearby deputies looked toward Hale without meaning to. Mercer remained silent. Naomi continued. Someone wanted a public spectacle. Someone wanted neighbors watching. Someone wanted assumptions made before facts were checked. The sheriff felt a knot forming in his stomach. He had spent 20 years in law enforcement. Instinct had protected him more than once. Right now, every instinct he possessed was telling him that Naomi Carter was not the threat. The real problem might be somewhere else entirely. Then a deputy hurried across the lawn carrying a tablet. His face had lost all color. Sheriff, he said quietly, you need to see this. Mercer accepted the device. The screen displayed information from a federal database that had just become accessible through a delayed records request. He read the first line, then the second, then the third. The morning sounds seemed to fade around him. Across the porch, Naomi watched his expression change. She already knew what he was reading. And for the first time since sunrise, Sheriff Daniel Mercer realized that the woman standing before him was far more important than anyone in this neighborhood had ever imagined. Sheriff Mercer stared at the tablet as the weight of the information settled over him. The first page contained federal service records. The second contained commendations. The third contained access classifications that were partially restricted even now. He slowly lowered the device and looked back toward Naomi. The woman standing on the porch of a modest brick house was not a retired office worker. She was not an anonymous resident caught in an investigation. For more than 20 years, Naomi Carter had worked within defense communication systems connected to some of the most sensitive operations in the country. The details were limited, but one line stood out above all others. Distinguished civilian service recognition. Another line referenced emergency coordination assignments supporting military personnel deployed overseas. Mercer felt a chill despite the warming morning air. Around him, officers continued waiting for instructions. They had no idea what he had just read. Lieutenant Hale stepped forward quickly. What does it say? He asked. Mercer did not answer immediately. Instead, he handed the tablet to the deputy who had brought it. Run a second verification. Hale's jaw tightened. We already have enough information. That response caught Mercer's attention. Do we? He asked. Hale folded his arms. The operation is already underway. That does not mean it was justified. For the first time that morning, tension appeared between the two men. Nearby officers noticed. So did the neighbors. Across the street, conversation slowed as people sensed something shifting. Naomi remained silent. She simply watched. The breeze stirred the rose bushes along her walkway. Sunlight reflected from the windows of parked police cruisers. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once and then fell quiet again. The deputy returned several minutes later carrying another tablet. His face looked even more unsettled than before. Sheriff, he said softly. The records match. Mercer took a slow breath. Anything else? The deputy nodded. There is a note attached from a federal liaison office. Read it. The deputy glanced at the screen. Subject has maintained active emergency contact privileges through authorized federal channels due to prior service contributions. Several officers exchanged confused looks. Hale immediately stepped forward. That does not change the current investigation. Naomi finally spoke. The problem is not the investigation. Every eye turned toward her. The problem is whoever created it. Silence followed. Hale's expression hardened. Careful. Naomi met his gaze calmly. I always am. The sheriff noticed something then. Every time questions approached the source of the allegations, Hale became defensive. Every time new information appeared, Hale tried redirecting attention. Mercer had trusted him for years, yet doubt had begun creeping into his mind. A deputy approached carrying a thick file folder recovered from county records. "Sheriff, we found the original complaint." Mercer opened it. The document contained signatures, dates, and supporting claims. At first glance, everything appeared normal. Then he noticed something unusual. Several timestamps had been entered manually rather than through the standard system. The formatting differed from official submissions. The attachments referenced reports that did not exist in the county database. Mercer slowly closed the folder. "Who processed this?" he asked. The deputy hesitated. "Lieutenant Hale's office." The neighborhood seemed to grow quieter. Hale immediately shook his head. There is an explanation. But his confidence was fading. Naomi watched without satisfaction and without anger. She looked only tired, as if she had seen similar situations before. Mercer glanced back toward the house. Through the front window, the folded American flag remained illuminated by the morning sun. A lifetime of service sat only a few feet away while 30 police vehicles crowded the street outside. The contrast struck him deeply. Then his radio crackled. A dispatcher spoke with unusual urgency. "Sheriff Mercer, federal representatives have contacted county headquarters. They are requesting immediate clarification regarding today's operation." The entire street fell still. Naomi lowered her eyes for a moment, almost as if she had expected that call long before anyone else. The dispatcher's voice echoed from several radios at once, and the effect on the street was immediate. Conversation stopped. Officers looked toward Sheriff Mercer. Even the neighbors seemed to sense that something significant had just changed. Mercer pressed a hand against the radio clipped to his vest. "This is Mercer. Go ahead." The reply came through clearly. "Federal representatives are requesting the operational basis for the deployment. They have also requested confirmation regarding the status of Naomi Carter." Mercer glanced toward the porch. Naomi stood exactly where she had been standing all morning. Calm, patient, watching. "Understood," he answered. "We are reviewing that now." The transmission ended, but the silence that followed felt heavier than any words. Lieutenant Hale stepped forward. "Immediately. Federal agencies ask questions all the time. It does not mean anything." Mercer turned toward him. "It means enough for them to contact county headquarters directly." Hale opened his mouth to respond, then stopped. His confidence was slipping. Nearby deputies were beginning to notice. One officer looked toward another and quietly asked, "Who exactly is she?" Nobody answered. Because nobody knew. Not completely. Another deputy approached Mercer carrying a fresh report printed only minutes earlier. "Sheriff, you need to see this too." Mercer accepted the pages. The first section contained a timeline of communications related to the complaint that had triggered the operation. Several entries appeared unusual. The complaint had moved through approval channels far faster than normal. Requests that typically required days had been processed overnight. Supporting documentation had bypassed multiple review steps. Mercer felt his stomach tighten. Every page raised more questions than it answered. Across the street, Mrs. Patterson shook her head slowly. "I have known that woman for 8 years," she whispered to her husband. "She brings soup when people are sick. She helped the Martins after their basement flooded. None of this makes sense." Her husband nodded silently. More neighbors were reaching the same conclusion. The assumptions they had made at sunrise were beginning to crumble. Meanwhile, Naomi remained composed. She set her coffee mug on a small table beside the porch swing and folded her hands together. The morning sunlight illuminated the front yard. A cardinal landed briefly on the fence before flying away again. The ordinary beauty of the scene felt almost surreal compared to the growing uncertainty surrounding the investigation. Mercer walked slowly toward the porch. For the first time, his voice carried less authority and more sincerity. "Miss Carter, is there something we are missing?" Naomi studied him for a moment. "That depends." "On what?" "Whether you are looking for the truth or looking for someone to blame." The answer lingered in the air. Mercer had no response, because deep down, he already suspected the truth. This operation had never been about evidence. It had been about perception. Somebody had wanted a dramatic display. Somebody had wanted 30 police vehicles in front of this house. Somebody had wanted cameras, neighbors, and public judgment. The realization was becoming impossible to ignore. Then another vehicle turned onto Maple Ridge Drive. It was not a police cruiser. It was a dark government sedan with federal plates. A second vehicle followed behind it. Officers immediately straightened. Neighbors watched in stunned silence. The sedans rolled forward and stopped near the edge of the operation. The doors opened. Two men and a woman stepped out wearing business attire rather than uniforms. None of them looked surprised by what they found. In fact, they looked disappointed. One of the men scanned the line of police vehicles before turning his attention toward Naomi. The moment he saw her, his expression changed. He removed his sunglasses and nodded respectfully in her direction. Not as one would greet a suspect. Not even as one would greet a witness. It was the kind of nod reserved for someone whose reputation had already been earned long before anyone else on that street knew her name. For a long moment, nobody moved. The arrival of the federal representatives seemed to drain the noise from Maple Ridge Drive itself. Even the flashing lights from the police vehicles felt less important now. The man who had nodded toward Naomi walked only a few steps before stopping near the sidewalk. He did not rush. He did not make announcements. Instead, he waited quietly, as though recognizing that something larger than procedure was unfolding. Sheriff Mercer watched him carefully, but the representative offered no immediate explanation. The neighborhood remained suspended in uncertainty. Naomi lowered herself onto the porch swing and gently rested her hands in her lap. The wood creaked softly beneath her weight. The simple sound seemed strangely comforting amid the tension. Sunlight warmed the porch floorboards. A faint breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass from somewhere down the street. For the first time all morning, Naomi looked tired. Not frightened, not angry, just tired. Her eyes drifted toward the flower beds she had been tending before sunrise. Several stems leaned sideways after being brushed by hurried footsteps earlier that morning. One yellow daisy had fallen against the edge of the walkway. Naomi noticed it immediately. She always noticed small things. Across the street, Mrs. Patterson slowly crossed her lawn carrying a watering can. She stopped at the curb and looked toward Naomi. Neither woman spoke, yet something passed between them. Understanding, respect, the kind built over years of quiet neighborly moments. Mrs. Patterson simply placed the watering can beside her mailbox and folded her hands together. Nearby, officers shifted uneasily. Many no longer seemed interested in the house. Instead, they watched their own leadership. Questions lingered everywhere. Why had the operation moved so quickly? Why had records contained inconsistencies? Why had federal representatives arrived before any evidence had been presented? Lieutenant Hale stood alone near one of the vehicles. Earlier, he had appeared confident. Now he seemed isolated. Several deputies who had spent the morning at his side had gradually moved away. Nobody accused him of anything. Nobody challenged him directly. Yet distance had formed around him all the same. Mercer noticed it. So did Hale. The federal representative finally spoke. His voice was calm and measured. "Sheriff, there will be time for discussion. For now, I suggest patience." Mercer nodded. Patience was not what he wanted. He wanted answers. But something told him the answers were already approaching. He looked back toward Naomi. The woman sitting on the porch seemed oddly detached from the chaos surrounding her. Almost as though she had lived through moments far more difficult than this one. The thought lingered in his mind. What kind of life produced that level of composure? What experiences taught someone to remain calm while an entire neighborhood watched them under suspicion? Naomi glanced toward the folded flag visible through her living room window. The reflection of sunlight shimmered across the glass display case. Her expression softened slightly. A memory seemed to pass through her eyes. Distant and private. Then it was gone. The breeze lifted again. Leaves rustled overhead. Somewhere in the distance, church bells began ringing the late morning hour. Their sound floated gently across the neighborhood. One by one, conversations faded. The officers grew quiet. The neighbors grew quiet. Even the reporters beginning to gather at the far end of the street seemed to lower their voices. It felt as though the entire block was waiting for something unseen to arrive. Naomi looked toward the sky for a brief moment. Clear blue stretched above the rooftops without a single cloud. Then she lowered her gaze and reached into her pocket. From inside, she removed a small card worn smooth by time. She studied it silently. The federal representative noticed. So did Mercer. Neither could see what was written on it, but both recognized the expression on her face. It was not the look of someone preparing to defend herself. It was the look of someone deciding whether a door she had kept closed for many years needed to be opened once again. Naomi turned the worn card over in her fingers once before slipping it back into her pocket. The motion was small, almost invisible, yet it seemed to mark a decision. She rose from the porch swing and walked to the small table beside the front door. Her coffee had gone cold. The neighborhood remained silent. The federal representatives watched her carefully. Sheriff Mercer watched her carefully. Even Lieutenant Hale could not take his eyes off her. Then Naomi reached into her jacket and removed her phone. No dramatic gestures. No raised voice. No speeches. She simply unlocked the screen and scrolled through a list of contacts. The federal representative nearest the sidewalk immediately recognized what she was doing. His expression changed. "Miss Carter," he said quietly. Naomi looked up. "I have avoided this for years." The man nodded slowly. "I know." She glanced across the street toward her neighbors. Some looked worried. Others looked embarrassed. Most simply looked confused. None of them knew the life she had lived before moving to Maple Ridge Drive. That had always been intentional. Naomi preferred gardens to headlines. She preferred helping neighbors carry groceries to discussing her past. But some doors, once forced open, could not be closed again. Her thumb paused over a number saved without a name. Only a sequence of digits. Sheriff Mercer noticed it immediately. "Who are you calling?" Naomi studied him for a moment. "Someone who can answer questions I should not have to answer myself." Then she pressed the call button. The line connected almost instantly. No automated menu. No waiting music. No transfers. A calm voice answered. "Operations desk." Several federal representatives exchanged glances. Mercer felt the hair rise on the back of his neck. Naomi spoke clearly. "This is Naomi Carter. Authorization reference Sierra 97 Delta." Silence followed. Then the voice on the line changed completely. Professional became urgent. "Miss Carter, please hold one moment." Nobody on the street moved. Even the wind seemed to pause. Seconds later, another voice appeared. Older. Sharper. "Naomi." She closed her eyes briefly. "Good morning, General Whitaker." The reaction was immediate. One of the federal representatives lowered his head. Another removed his glasses. Sheriff Mercer stared in disbelief. The name was impossible to misunderstand. General Harold Whitaker was one of the most respected senior defense officials in the country. Naomi continued speaking calmly. "I apologize for disturbing your morning." "You are not disturbing anything," the general replied. "Why was this line activated?" Naomi looked toward the police vehicles lining the street. "I believe someone has used local resources to manufacture a federal concern that does not exist." A long pause followed. Then the general asked a single question. "Are you safe?" Naomi smiled faintly. "Perfectly safe." The general exhaled. "Stay where you are. Do not leave your property. We are addressing this immediately." The call ended. No further explanation. No dramatic announcement. Just certainty. Naomi lowered the phone and slipped it back into her pocket. Across the street, neighbors looked at one another in stunned silence. Sheriff Mercer felt as though the ground beneath the entire operation had shifted. Lieutenant Hale looked pale. For the first time all morning, he seemed genuinely worried. Then another radio crackled. And another. Then a third. Messages began arriving simultaneously across multiple channels. Officers looked down at their devices. Deputies checked their screens. Federal representatives received notifications at the same time. Whatever had begun with a quiet phone call on a sunny Virginia morning was no longer a local matter. And everyone on Maple Ridge Drive suddenly realized they were witnessing the moment the truth had finally reached the people powerful enough to see it. The effect was almost immediate. Messages continued arriving across radios, phones, and secured devices throughout the street. Officers glanced at screens, then at one another, unsure what to say. Several federal representatives stepped aside to take calls. Their conversations were brief and serious. Whatever information was moving through official channels was moving fast. Sheriff Mercer felt his phone vibrate again. He opened the latest message and read it twice. Then a third time. The notification confirmed that multiple agencies had begun reviewing the origins of the complaint that triggered the operation. A separate directive instructed all participating personnel to preserve records, communications, and authorization logs. Mercer slowly lowered the phone. He no longer had any doubt. The focus of the day had changed completely. Across the street, neighbors sensed it too. The crowd that had gathered expecting to witness an arrest was now watching something entirely different. They were watching a carefully constructed narrative collapse under its own weight. Naomi remained on her porch, calm as ever. She did not celebrate. She did not look vindicated. She simply stood beside the porch swing with her hands folded, watching events unfold. The federal representative who had first recognized her finally approached the front gate. "Miss Carter," he said respectfully, "I owe you an apology." Naomi shook her head gently. "You do not owe me anything." "I disagree." His voice carried genuine regret. "You should never have been placed in this position." Naomi offered a faint smile. "Then make sure it does not happen to someone else." The representative nodded. Those words seemed to affect him more than any accusation could have. Nearby, Lieutenant Hale received a phone call of his own. The color drained from his face as he listened. He attempted to respond several times, but each attempt became shorter than the last. When the call ended, he stared at the screen without moving. The confidence that had driven him throughout the morning was gone. A deputy approached him with a folder. Hale barely looked at it. Another officer asked a question. Hale did not answer. The isolation around him deepened. Sheriff Mercer watched quietly. 20 years of experience had taught him that truth often arrived in pieces. A detail here, a contradiction there. Then suddenly the entire picture became impossible to ignore. He walked toward Naomi's porch and removed his hat. Several officers noticed immediately. The gesture carried weight. Mercer stopped a few feet away. "Miss Carter," he said, "I should have asked more questions before bringing this operation to your doorstep." Naomi looked at him for a long moment. "You asked questions eventually." Mercer lowered his eyes briefly. "Not soon enough." The honesty surprised even him. Across the street, Mrs. Patterson smiled sadly. She understood what many others were only beginning to realize. Naomi had spent years being underestimated because she never demanded attention, because she chose quiet over recognition, because she preferred service over status. The federal representatives gathered near their vehicles. New instructions had arrived. Reviews were being launched. Documentation was being requested. Decisions made behind closed doors were now being examined in the open. The process would take time, but its direction was unmistakable. Then one final vehicle entered Maple Ridge Drive. It was another government sedan. An older man stepped out carrying a leather portfolio. The moment several federal officials saw him, they straightened instinctively. He walked directly toward Naomi. When he reached the gate, he paused and smiled warmly. "It has been a long time," he said. Naomi's expression softened. "Too long." The man nodded. "The general sends his regards." A ripple moved through the crowd. Mercer listened carefully. The visitor opened the portfolio and removed a framed document. Sunlight reflected across the glass. "There are people in Washington who never forgot what you did," he said quietly. Today reminded them. Naomi looked at the frame but did not immediately take it. For a moment, the entire street seemed to hold its breath, waiting to learn who the quiet woman on Maple Ridge Drive had truly been all along. Naomi finally accepted the framed document and looked down at it quietly. The glass reflected the afternoon sunlight, making it difficult for anyone else to read. Yet the reaction from the federal officials said more than the document itself ever could. The older man smiled gently. "You never liked recognition," he said. Naomi let out a soft laugh. "Recognition does not help flowers grow." Several neighbors chuckled nervously. The tension that had gripped Maple Ridge Drive since sunrise was finally beginning to dissolve. One by one, police vehicles started leaving the neighborhood. Engines started. Doors closed. Flashing lights disappeared from lawns and windows. The spectacle that had drawn so much attention was ending not with accusations, but with understanding. Sheriff Mercer stood near the curb watching the operation unwind. He felt older than he had that morning. The lessons of the day would stay with him for a long time. After a moment, he walked toward Naomi one final time. He extended his hand. "I cannot change how today started," he said, "but I can make sure I remember how it ended." Naomi shook his hand warmly. "That is enough." Mercer nodded. No speeches, no excuses, just a simple acknowledgement of the truth. Nearby, several deputies quietly followed his example. Some offered apologies. Others simply offered respect. Naomi accepted each gesture with grace. She did not humiliate anyone. She did not seek revenge. The neighbors noticed that too. They watched a woman who had every reason to be angry choose dignity instead. Across the street, Mrs. Patterson finally walked over carrying the watering can she had brought earlier. She held it out with a smile. "I think your flowers could use a little help." Naomi laughed softly. "I think you are right." Together they crossed the lawn toward the flower beds. The federal representatives exchanged amused glances. After everything that had happened, Naomi's first concern was still her garden. The older official closed his portfolio. Before leaving, he turned toward the crowd. "Many years ago," he said, "this woman helped protect people she never met and never asked to be thanked by. Some of those people never forgot." Then he stopped speaking. Nothing more needed to be said. The message had already landed. The government vehicles departed shortly afterward. Federal officials left. County personnel left. Reporters who had begun gathering at the end of the street slowly dispersed. By late afternoon, Maple Ridge Drive looked almost normal again. Almost. Because something had changed. Neighbors now waved at Naomi with a deeper appreciation than before. Officers who passed through town would remember her name. Sheriff Mercer would remember the danger of assumptions. And somewhere far away, people inside secure offices had been reminded of a woman whose service had never truly ended. As the sun drifted lower, golden lights spread across the neighborhood. Long shadows stretched over sidewalks and lawns. Naomi knelt beside the flower bed near her porch and gently straightened the yellow daisy that had fallen earlier. A little dirt clung to her fingertips. The petals caught the sunlight beautifully. She smiled. The world finally felt quiet again. Inside her living room, the folded American flag remained in its display case. Outside, the evening breeze moved softly through the trees. Across the street, children rode bicycles home for dinner. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary life. Naomi picked up her watering can and continued caring for the flowers she had been tending before sunrise. No audience remained. No officials remained. No flashing lights remained. Only the fading sunlight, the scent of fresh earth, and the peaceful rhythm of water falling onto roots. And as the last rays of day reflected across the porch windows, Maple Ridge Drive seemed to breathe again, leaving behind a silence that felt less like an ending and more like justice finally finding its way home.